May 8, 1942. Lieutenant Commander Robert Dixon banks his Douglas Dauntless dive bomber over the churning waters of the Coral Sea, 700 miles off the coast of Australia. Below him, the Japanese carrier Shōhō is already listing hard to port, torn apart by bombs and torpedoes. Dixon keys his radio transmitter and sends 4 words that electrify the American fleet. Scratch 1 flat top. It's a moment of triumph. But Dixon doesn't know that at that exact moment, 90 miles to the north, Japanese dive bombers are ripping into the USS Lexington, one of only 4 American carriers left in the Pacific. He doesn't know that within hours, the Lexington will be abandoned and scuttled. And he certainly doesn't know that this chaotic, sprawling battle, fought entirely by aircraft, with the opposing fleets never seeing each other, will fundamentally change naval warfare forever. This is the Battle of the Coral Sea, the first aircraft carrier battle in history, a tactical draw that became a strategic turning point. And today, we're going to break down exactly what happened, why it mattered, and how this 4-day clash in the waters northeast of Australia stopped the Japanese advance in the Pacific. Now stick around to the end, because I'm going to show you exactly why the 2 Japanese carriers that survived this battle could have changed the outcome at Midway 1 month later. If you want to understand how this lesser-known battle set up the most decisive naval engagement of World War II, go ahead and hit that subscribe button now. Let's get into it. To understand the Coral Sea, you need to understand just how dominant Japan looked in May 1942. 6 months earlier, on December 7, 1941, Japanese carrier aircraft devastated Pearl Harbor. In the weeks that followed, Japan conquered an area larger than Western Europe. Hong Kong fell on Christmas Day. Manila fell January 2nd. Singapore, the supposedly impregnable British fortress, surrendered on February 15th with 85,000 troops. The Dutch East Indies collapsed in March. Burma was being overrun. The Japanese had captured oil fields, rubber plantations, strategic harbors, and controlled shipping lanes across Southeast Asia. And they weren't done. In April 1942, Japanese planners began preparing Operation Mo, the invasion of Port Moresby on the southern coast of New Guinea. Port Moresby sits just 300 miles across the Torres Strait from Australia. Control it, and Japanese bombers could strike Australian cities. More importantly, it would secure Japan's southern flank and cut Allied supply lines to Australia. The invasion force was substantial. 11 transports carrying 5,000 troops, a close support group with the light carrier Shōhō, a covering force with the fleet carriers Shokaku and Zuikaku, 2 of the most powerful warships in the world. These weren't the older carriers that had struck Pearl Harbor. These were modern, fast, heavily armed vessels, each carrying over 70 aircraft. The Japanese plan seemed straightforward. The invasion convoy would approach Port Moresby from the north, protected by land-based aircraft from Rabaul. Meanwhile, the carrier striking force would sweep into the Coral Sea from the east, destroying any Allied ships that tried to interfere. But American codebreakers had cracked the Japanese naval codes. Station Hypo in Hawaii, led by Commander Joseph Rochefort, had been intercepting and decrypting Japanese communications for months. By late April, Rochefort's team had a clear picture. A major Japanese operation was developing. Target Port Moresby, time frame early May. Admiral Chester Nimitz, Commander-in-Chief of the Pacific Fleet, made a crucial decision. He would commit his carriers, all of them that were available. The USS Lexington and USS Yorktown were ordered to the Coral Sea under the command of Rear Admiral Frank Jack Fletcher. These were 2 of only 4 operational American carriers left in the Pacific. The other 2, Enterprise and Hornet, were returning from the Doolittle raid on Tokyo. If the Lexington and Yorktown were lost, America's ability to project power in the Pacific would be crippled. Fletcher understood the stakes. His orders were clear: stop the invasion of Port Moresby. But he was operating under significant disadvantages. Japanese pilots were combat veterans with extensive training. American pilots, many of them, had never dropped a torpedo or bomb in anger. Japanese aircraft carriers were faster and carried more planes, and Japanese naval intelligence, while not as sophisticated as American code-breaking, was still formidable. By May 4th, both forces were moving into position. The Americans knew the Japanese were coming. The Japanese knew the Americans were somewhere in the area. What followed was 4 days of confusion, missed opportunities, brilliant tactics, terrible mistakes, and unprecedented violence. This would be a battle unlike any in naval history. May 4th, 1942. The battle's first engagement isn't even in the Coral Sea proper. American scout planes spot Japanese forces at Tulagi in the Solomon Islands, about 400 miles to the northeast. Tulagi is small, just a seaplane base and a few support ships, but Admiral Fletcher sees an opportunity. He detaches the Yorktown and races north, launching 3 strikes against the Japanese positions. The attacks sink a destroyer, 3 minesweepers, and several smaller craft. It's not a major victory, but it's psychologically important. American pilots are getting combat experience, and it sends a message: the U.S. Navy is willing to fight. But Fletcher has just announced his presence in the theater. Japanese commanders now know at least one American carrier is in the area. The element of surprise is gone. May 5th and 6th pass with both sides maneuvering, searching, probing. Reconnaissance aircraft fan out across thousands of square miles of ocean looking for the enemy fleet. Weather in the Coral Sea is deteriorating. Squalls, low clouds, limited visibility. It's both a blessing and a curse. The poor weather hides the fleets from each other, but it also makes finding the enemy incredibly difficult. By the evening of May 6th, the 2 carrier forces are less than 70 miles apart. Neither knows it. That night, Japanese and American ships actually pass within a few miles of each other in the darkness. Sailors on both sides report seeing shadows on the horizon, hearing engines, but no one opens fire. In the morning, they'll realize how close they came to a point-blank nighttime surface engagement, exactly the kind of fight the Japanese excelled at. May 7th. This is when things start going wrong for both sides. At dawn, Fletcher launches scouts to search to the north and west. At 08:15, a report comes in. 2 carriers and 4 heavy cruisers, sighted approximately 175 miles to the northwest. Fletcher doesn't hesitate. He launches a full strike, 93 aircraft from Lexington and Yorktown. It's a massive commitment of his air power. There's just one problem. The scout made a coding error. The actual report should have read 2 heavy cruisers and 2 destroyers, not 2 carriers. The scout pilot misidentified the ships, then made a clerical mistake when encoding the message. By the time the error is discovered, the strike is already airborne, committed to a target that doesn't exist. Commander William Ault, leading the Lexington Air Group, reaches the reported position and finds nothing. No carriers, just empty ocean. He expands the search pattern, burning precious fuel. Then, at 10:22, pure luck intervenes. Ault's planes spot the Japanese light carrier Shōhō steaming south with the Port Moresby invasion convoy. Shōhō is smaller than the fleet carriers. She can only carry about 30 aircraft compared to 70 or more on the big carriers. But she's a legitimate target. Ault doesn't hesitate. He attacks. What follows is, from the American perspective, almost perfect. The dive bombers go in first. Dauntless SBDs peel off one by one, screaming down at 70-degree angles, releasing their 1,000-pound bombs at the last possible moment. The first bomb hits Shōhō on the flight deck, exploding among aircraft being prepared for launch. Fires erupt. Then more bombs hit. The flight deck buckles. Aircraft are blown overboard or consumed by flames. Before the crew can even begin damage control, the torpedo bombers arrive. Devastator TBDs come in low and slow. Dangerous work, flying straight and level while anti-aircraft guns track you and release their torpedoes in coordinated attacks from multiple angles. Shōhō is trapped. She can't evade torpedoes coming from 3 directions simultaneously. Multiple hits strike below the waterline. Water floods the engine rooms. The ship loses power and begins listing heavily. The entire attack takes less than 15 minutes. 13 bombs hit. 7 torpedoes hit. Shōhō is finished. At 11:35, the order to abandon ship is given. The carrier capsizes and sinks, taking 631 men with her. Of the nearly 800 men aboard, only 203 survive. That's when Lieutenant Commander Dixon sends his famous radio call, "Scratch 1 flat top." Back on the Lexington and Yorktown, there's celebration. But the Americans have just revealed their position and committed their air groups. And somewhere to the north, the Japanese fleet carriers Shokaku and Zuikaku are launching their own strikes. They're hunting, too. While American pilots are attacking Shōhō, the Japanese have their own case of mistaken identity unfolding. A Japanese scout reports sighting an American carrier. Admiral Takagi, commanding the Japanese carrier force, immediately launches a strike of 78 aircraft from Shokaku and Zuikaku. It's the Japanese philosophy: hit hard, hit fast, sink enemy carriers before they can strike back. But the scout made an error. The ship he reported as a carrier is actually the USS Neosho, an oiler. The cruiser accompanying her is actually the destroyer USS Sims. The Japanese strike arrives over Neosho and Sims around 09:30. The pilots are confused. This isn't a carrier. This isn't even a valuable target. But they're committed. Fuel is limited. They attack. The Sims is hit by 3 bombs and breaks in half, sinking in minutes. Only 15 of her 236-man crew survive. The Neosho, larger and heavily built, absorbs hit after hit, 7 bombs, possibly more. The ship is wrecked, dead in the water, burning, but somehow still afloat. She'll drift for 4 days before being found. Out of her crew of 293, only 123 survive. It's a waste of Japanese air power. 78 aircraft, Japan's best pilots, attacking an oiler and a destroyer, while the American carriers escape detection. When the strike returns to Shokaku and Zuikaku, the pilots are demoralized. They know they hit the wrong targets. But the day isn't over. As the sun begins to set on May 7th, both carrier forces finally have accurate intelligence on each other's positions. Admiral Fletcher knows the Japanese fleet carriers are somewhere to the north. Admiral Takagi knows the American carriers are to the south. The Japanese make an aggressive, risky decision. At 16:15, they launch a strike of 27 aircraft into the gathering darkness. The plan is to hit the American carriers at dusk, when defending fighters will have trouble intercepting in the poor light. It almost works. Around 1800, radar operators on the Lexington pick up the incoming raid. American fighters scramble to intercept. What follows is a chaotic, confused air battle in fading light, heavy clouds, and scattered rain squalls. Wildcat fighters tangle with Japanese bombers. Some bombers are shot down. Others jettison their ordnance and flee. A few actually press their attacks, but in the darkness and confusion, they miss. Then something remarkable happens. The surviving Japanese aircraft, low on fuel and disoriented in the darkness, mistake the American carriers for their own. Several Japanese pilots enter the landing pattern for the Yorktown. They're flying the correct approach, gear and flaps down, attempting to land on the American carrier. American anti-aircraft gunners hold their fire, equally confused. Pilots in the landing pattern stare at the unfamiliar silhouettes. Finally, someone realizes these are Japanese aircraft. The Yorktown opens fire, the Japanese planes scatter into the darkness. Several Japanese aircraft are lost trying to find their carriers in the dark. At least 11 aircraft from the strike never make it back. Japanese air strength has been depleted for no gain. May 7th ends with the scorecard reading, Americans 1, Japanese 0. The light carrier Shōhō is sunk, but the two main carrier forces haven't yet engaged. That's coming tomorrow. May 8, 1942. Both sides wake up knowing this is the decisive day. At dawn, scout planes launch from all four carriers. Weather is still poor, broken clouds, intermittent rain, visibility a few miles at best. But by 0800, both sides have located each other. The Japanese carriers are about 120 miles northeast of the American carriers. It's a race now. Who can launch first? Who can strike first? In carrier warfare, the first punch often decides everything. The Americans launch first. Starting at 9 o'clock, the Lexington and Yorktown begin launching a strike of 82 aircraft, dive bombers, torpedo bombers, and escorting fighters. It takes nearly an hour to get everyone airborne and formed up. By the time the last aircraft departs, the Japanese strike is already inbound. The Japanese launched 70 aircraft from Shokaku and Zuikaku, a more experienced strike force, better coordinated, flying better aircraft in many respects. The Japanese have a head start, but the Americans have radar. At 10:55, Lexington's radar picks up the incoming Japanese raid at 68 miles. Defending fighters are vectored toward the threat. The Americans have about 20 Wildcats in the air. The Japanese have a dozen Zeros escorting the strike. What follows is a massive, sprawling dogfight. Zeros are faster, more maneuverable, and have longer range than the Wildcats. But the Wildcats are tougher, with self-sealing fuel tanks and armor protection. Japanese philosophy emphasized agility and offensive firepower at the expense of defensive survivability. American philosophy emphasized keeping your pilots alive. The air battle rages for about 15 minutes. Several Japanese aircraft are shot down, but the bulk of the strike breaks through. At 11:13, the first bombs start falling on the Lexington. The Lexington is massive, 888 feet long, displacing over 43,000 tons. She's one of the largest carriers in the world, originally designed as a battlecruiser before being converted under the Washington Naval Treaty. Her size makes her a stable platform, excellent for aircraft operations, but it also makes her a big, slow target. 19 Japanese dive bombers attacked the Lexington. The ship's anti-aircraft guns put up a wall of fire, but the Japanese pilots are skilled and determined. 2 bombs hit. One strikes the port-forward gun gallery, killing the gun crews and starting fires. Another penetrates the smokestack and explodes inside the ship. Then the torpedo bombers arrive. Kate torpedo bombers come in from multiple directions: port, starboard, bow, stern. The Lexington's captain, Frederick Sherman, maneuvers frantically, trying to comb the torpedo wakes, but you can't dodge them all. 2 torpedoes strike the port side, ripping massive holes below the waterline. The ship takes on a 7-degree list. At 11:27, the attack ends. The Lexington is badly damaged, but still operational. Damage control teams are fighting fires. Engineers are counter-flooding to correct the list. The flight deck is still functional. Aircraft are being recovered. Nearby, the Yorktown has been attacked by 33 Japanese aircraft. She's smaller and more agile than the Lexington. Her captain, Elliot Buckmaster, handles her brilliantly. The Yorktown evades 7 torpedoes and most of the bombs, but one bomb gets through, an 800-pound armor-piercing bomb that penetrates the flight deck and explodes deep in the ship, killing 66 men. The damage is serious but manageable. Within an hour, the Yorktown's flight deck is operational again, recovering aircraft. Both American carriers have been hit, but both are still fighting. Now it's the American strike's turn. The American aircraft reach the Japanese carriers around 10:30. The weather favors the Japanese. Shokaku is steaming in relatively clear conditions, but Zuikaku has found a rain squall and is hiding under the cloud cover. The American pilots can only find one carrier, Shokaku. They attack in waves, just like the Japanese did. The dive bombers go in first. Dauntless SBDs push over from 14,000 feet, diving through scattered clouds, anti-aircraft fire exploding around them. The first bomb is a near miss, close enough to spray shrapnel across the flight deck. The second bomb hits the flight deck edge, causing moderate damage. The third bomb hits squarely on the flight deck, punching through and exploding in the hangar deck below. Aircraft being prepared for the next strike are destroyed. Fires break out. More bombs hit. By the time the attack ends, Shōhō has taken 3 direct hits. Her flight deck is wrecked. She can't launch or recover aircraft, but her engines still work. Her hull integrity is intact. She turns for home at 25 knots. The torpedo bombers attack next. 11 Devastators from the Lexington press in through intense anti-aircraft fire. It's the most dangerous job in naval aviation, flying low, slow, and straight, while every gun on the ship is trying to kill you. Several torpedo bombers are shot down. The rest release their torpedoes and escape, but every single torpedo misses. The Japanese captain maneuvers skillfully, and the American torpedoes, plagued with reliability problems throughout the war, fail to perform. The Yorktown's torpedo squadron has better luck in terms of survival, but the same result: no torpedo hits. Shōhō escapes further damage, but she's out of the fight. The Americans can't find Zuikaku. She remains hidden in the rain squall. The strike returns to the carriers, having damaged one enemy carrier but failed to sink her. The battle is essentially over. Both sides have bloodied each other. Now it's a matter of survival and salvage. The Lexington seems to be recovering. By noon, the fires are under control. The list has been corrected. The flight deck is operational. Aircraft are landing. Captain Sherman is cautiously optimistic. The damage is serious, but the ship will make it. Then, at 12:47, there's an explosion deep in the ship. When the torpedoes hit, they ruptured aviation fuel lines in the ship's lower compartments. Fuel vapor has been accumulating in the poorly ventilated spaces for over an hour. A motor generator sparks, and the vapor ignites. The explosion isn't huge, but it's in exactly the wrong place. It ruptures more fuel lines, more vapor spreads through the ship, more fires ignite. A second explosion follows at 14:42. This one is bigger. It blows out the elevator platform and sends flames shooting hundreds of feet into the air. The situation deteriorates rapidly. Fire parties are losing control. The ship is losing power. Communications are failing. At 1500, more massive explosions rock the ship as fires reach ammunition magazines and bomb storage. Captain Sherman faces the terrible decision. At 1707, he gives the order to abandon ship. The evacuation is remarkably orderly. Sailors form lines, passing jackets forward. Wounded are lowered on stretchers. Men slide down ropes into the water. Nearby destroyers move in close, pulling men from the sea. By 1915, the ship is evacuated. Of the 2,951 men aboard, 2,735 are saved, but 216 are dead or missing. Many killed in the initial attack, others trapped below decks when the internal explosions occurred. The destroyer USS Phelps is given the grim task of finishing the Lexington. At 1752, Phelps fires 5 torpedoes into the burning hulk. The great carrier, one of the symbols of American naval power, rolls over and sinks in 2,400 fathoms of water. It's a devastating loss, but the battle is over, and the results are complex. So who won the Battle of the Coral Sea? Tactically, it's arguably a Japanese victory. They sank the Lexington, a fleet carrier, and damaged the Yorktown. The Americans sank the Shōhō, a light carrier, and damaged the Shōkaku. In terms of tonnage and capability, the Japanese came out slightly ahead. But strategically, it's an American victory, and here's why. The Port Moresby invasion was called off. The Japanese transports turned back. Port Moresby remained in Allied hands. The direct threat to Australia was stopped. Japan's southward expansion was halted for the first time since Pearl Harbor. Moreover, the two Japanese fleet carriers were knocked out of action. Shokaku needed months of repairs. Zukaku's air group had suffered heavy losses and needed time to train replacement pilots. Both carriers would miss the Battle of Midway 1 month later, and at Midway, those two extra carriers might have changed everything. The Americans, meanwhile, rushed the Yorktown back to Pearl Harbor. In an incredible 72-hour repair effort, she was patched up and sent back out. She fought at Midway. Her presence there was crucial. The Battle of the Coral Sea also represented a profound shift in naval warfare. This was the first battle in history where opposing fleets never sighted each other, never came within gun range. Every blow was delivered by aircraft. The battleship era was definitively over. The carrier was now the dominant capital ship. American pilots gained invaluable combat experience. They learned what worked and what didn't. Dive bombers proved devastatingly effective. Torpedo bombers were brave, but their weapons were unreliable. Coordination between different aircraft types needed work. Fighter direction using radar showed promise. The Japanese learned lessons too, though they were slower to adapt. Their pilots were still superior in training and experience, but American pilots were getting better fast. And the Japanese couldn't replace losses as quickly as the Americans could. There's a somber footnote to the battle. Commander William Ault, who led the strike against the Shōhō, was shot down during the attack on Shokaku. His plane was badly damaged by anti-aircraft fire. He tried to make it back to the Lexington, but ran out of fuel. His last radio transmission was calm, professional. "Okay, so long, people. We got a 1,000-pound hit on the flattop." He was never seen again. He was awarded the Navy Cross posthumously. He was 43 years old. Over the 4-day battle, the Americans lost the Lexington, the destroyer Sims, the oiler Neosho, 66 aircraft, and 656 men killed. The Japanese lost Shōhō, 77 aircraft, and approximately 1,074 men killed. Those numbers don't fully capture what happened in the Coral Sea. This wasn't just a battle. It was a pivot point. Before Coral Sea, Japan seemed unstoppable. After Coral Sea, the myth of invincibility was broken. 1 month later, American carriers met Japanese carriers again at Midway. 4 Japanese fleet carriers were sunk in a single day. The strategic initiative in the Pacific shifted permanently to the United States. The lessons learned at Coral Sea about carrier tactics, about radar fighter direction, about coordination between ships and aircraft were applied at Midway. The experience gained by American pilots was crucial. In that sense, the Battle of the Coral Sea was the beginning of the end for Japanese naval dominance. It was the first step on a long, bloody road that would eventually lead to Tokyo Bay and surrender. Today, the wrecks of Lexington and Shōhō rest on the ocean floor, over 2 miles down in the Coral Sea. In 2018, a research team led by Paul Allen found the Lexington. She's remarkably intact, sitting upright on the bottom. Her aircraft are still visible on the hangar deck. It's a haunting reminder of what happened in those waters in May 1942, of the men who fought there, of the ships that were lost, and of the moment when naval warfare changed forever. So here's my question. If Shokaku and Zuikaku had been available at Midway, how do you think that battle would have played out? Let me know in the comments. If you found this deep dive into the Battle of the Coral Sea interesting, hit that subscribe button. I've got more naval history content coming, including a breakdown of Midway and the battles that followed. Thanks for watching, and remember, scratch one flat top.